Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Go Farther series here on the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. We are motoring along. We're going to continue with our Go Farther series. And today's topic, to jump right in, is one of my favorite topics. In fact, I have a sign in my office, which I'm pointing to. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it. If not, I'm pointing to a sign that my wife got me a few years ago that actually writes out the theme for today. And today's theme is Relentless Forward Progress. Relentless Forward Progress. So lots of examples from ultra running and stuff I'm doing out there on the endurance track. And so that's really what I want to focus today. And I'm going to let you think about how these lessons from the trail around this topic, relentless forward progress, might relate to your work life. In particular, the timing of this episode probably couldn't be more appropriate because if you're watching this on YouTube and I look a little bit tired and a little bit puffy-eyed, I am less than 48 hours removed from what we call pacing duties. So just this past weekend over up in the Sierra Nevadas, there was the Western States 100, a race I've talked about quite a bit and a race I've done in 2021, and perhaps maybe a race that I want to do again at some point in the future. And so it's a 100-mile foot race from Olympic Valley up in the Tahoe region all the way, and it works its way up and down, up over like the top of Olympic Valley, the top of Palisades, and then eventually ends up down in Auburn, California. So it starts around 6,000 feet, goes up to 8,900 feet, and then down to 1,000 feet. So it's one of the biggest races in the ultra running world, that sort of the Super Bowl of ultra running. And while I was not in the race this weekend, I did quite a bit of work around the race. So Saturday morning, got up at 6 a.m. and was out the door by 9 because our running club here in Davis, California, actually runs one of the aid stations around mile 65 or so. And so it requires my truck and the help of two other people, where we have to go down this long descent on a dirt, really, really tricky dirt road with lots of ruts. In fact, last year I blew a tire on the side of a ravine. So changing a tire because of a rock puncture on my tire was not a fun thing on the side of a 2,000-foot cliff. So taking all of the water, all of the food, all of the tents, everything down to this aid station. Worked at the aid station until about 5:30 in the afternoon as the lead runners were coming through. Left the aid station, drove back up out of the ravine, and then took on pacing duties for a runner that was running the race from Hong Kong. So lots of international runners here. And there's a woman, Lisa, who coordinates all of the support activity for the Hong Kong international runners. There's 2 of them this year. And so she pinged my friend Kelly and said, hey, this guy would like to have a couple pacers. So Kelly ran with him from Forest Hill, which is mile 63, down to a place called The River. That aid station is called Rucky Chuck. Some fun names there. So that's around mile 78, where I met the runner at mile 78. We crossed over the river, through the river, not over it, actually through it, and then to the end of the race at mile 100.3. So I had 22 miles of pacing duty. And so that's actually the backdrop for today's lesson from the trail, today's episode on the Go Farther series called Relentless Forward Progress, because watching this runner, the American name he adopted was Patrick. So we'll go with Patrick. And the name of Patrick is just easier for obviously us Americans to say rather than his Chinese name. And so having spent 22 miles with him and watching him go from Forest Hill down to the river with Kelly, a great reminder for me on watching him and his pursuit of relentless forward progress to get to the finish line. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So why this topic? Let's dig in. So number one, right, the whole theme here of Go Farther is that we want to do more. We want to be happy. We want to surprise ourselves. We want to go farther. And in this case, for Patrick, it was going farther to hit the finish line at mile 100.3. For the rest of us, it could be, a physical endeavor where we're running our first 10K or half marathon, or of course, lots of applications of Go Farther to our business life or our personal life. So why is this topic important? Why is this theme, relentless forward progress, really a foundation, a bedrock to a lot of this concept of going farther? Well, number one, we know if we're doing hard things, it's going to be hard. My wife told me years ago when I was struggling with work and I was complaining about everything felt hard. She said, well, look, it's hard because you've solved all of the easy problems. The only problems that left are the hard ones. And that just means you're on a path to do remarkable things or hard things at least. Secondly, our brains are designed for survival, which means that, we a lot of times we want to quit. There's lots of reasons we can give ourselves and lots of external environmental reasons that will, give us that doubt and say, like, maybe I should quit. And then, of course, we sometimes can even start questioning ourselves. Like, did I choose something that was too lofty, too difficult? Like, why am I doing this? Like, am I just crazy? Like, part of being crazy is what's necessary to go farther and do hard things. There's also, a line that we have to be careful not to cross where we get so crazy that it's not worth doing because the sacrifices we might be making to other parts of our life, right? And deep down inside for me, I always have this fear whenever I'm heads down, going through a process, trying to do hard things. Sometimes my fear is like, is this all really worth it? Like, is the cost that I'm absorbing worth that net benefit that I think and might not even know is going to be at the end? So where we want to be, of course, is we want to be resilient. We want to be able to handle adversity, be able to take the next step. It's a 100-mile race, and sometimes the mantra is just going station to station. There's 8 stations along the way. And if you try to think about the race as a 100-mile race, it's too big, it's too overwhelming. You can't really conceptualize it because most runners are running for more than 24 hours just to get to that finish line. So one of the strategies that we talk a lot about with runners is just going station to station, get to, in the case of Western states, get to Lions Ridge at mile 10, get to Red Star at mile 16, get to Duncan Creek, mile 24, Robinson Flat, mile 30, so on and so forth. So you're breaking those bigger adventures down into smaller manageable chunks. And if we do those things, then that will get us to where we want to go, which is to do more, be happy, and surprise yourself to go further. So really what I want to dig in here is really just talk about my observation watching Patrick throughout the course of his race, both at watching him, tracking him as he left Olympic Valley at 5 o'clock in the morning to the point where we met him at Forest Hill in the early evening, and then watching him leave Forest Hill and then eventually meeting him down at the river a few hours later and then getting him to the finish line the next morning. So that's going to be the running theme here as we talk about relentless forward progress. The framework that I want to use to talk about relentless forward progress is a little bit of a mantra that I kind of self-developed years ago when I was first started doing triathlons, probably close to 20 years ago. I remember sitting down before races and telling myself, and these 3 words just kind of popped to mind. I always told myself patience, persistence, perseverance. Patience, persistence, perseverance. So before a race, I tell myself, like, look, go out, just be patient, right? You're not going to win the race. First of all, you want to have a good race for you, right? That means you can't go out too hard in the swim. You need to be patient and just do your pace. You can't go faster than you can go on the bike. Don't blow yourself out in the first couple miles on a run. So just be patient, right? Just do your own thing. The second is persistence. Like, you're going to have to keep going, right? Relentless forward progress is all about persistence and not letting yourself give up along the way. And thirdly, perseverance for me was a word that just meant, hey, there's going to be obstacles. There's going to be things that may go wrong. You might get a blister. Your stomach might not be great. You might find that you're cramping. You might, have a gear situation on your bike. You might get a flat tire. And those are reasons that you have to persevere through those difficulties. So those are the 3 words I tell myself before every race. I just tell myself at the starting line: patience, persistence, perseverance. And I want to use those 3 words and dive into those to talk about, my observations with Patrick in his race and the idea of relentless forward progress. So patience. Let's talk about patience, number 1. So again, the race is a 100-mile race, and we can subdivide it down into those 8 stations like I talked about. The course itself, most people think of it as kind of 3 main sections of the race. So the first 30 miles, what are called the high country, because it's relatively high. The elevation, you start at 6,000 feet, go up to 8,900, then you're down a little bit, move back up to 7,000 feet at Robinson Flat, which is at mile 30. So those first 30 miles are mostly above 7,000 feet. From mile 30, you start to work downhill into the second section of the race, which we call the canyons. So those are 3 descents followed by 3 climbs out of those descents where you're going down into a canyon and then climbing back up. And those climbs can be anywhere from 1,500 feet to 2,500 feet each climb. So each of those climbs are going to be, you're mostly walking up those hills. It's hot. It's middle of the day. It's very exposed out there, unfortunately, because of forest fires over the last few years. So not a lot of tree cover. And it's the middle of the day. So most runners are going to be going through the canyons at, starting at noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, where it's the height of the day. And it's the end of June out here in the Sierra Nevadas. So that means in some cases it can be as 100 degrees or more. So that's the second section of the race, which when you work through the canyons, that's where you end up at Forest Hill, which is really that huge aid station where it's command central for the race itself. It's mile 63. You're through the canyons. Most runners are now starting to hit that part of the day where it's starting to cool down. And so the temperatures start to cool. You might start to feel a little bit of a breeze. You're out of the canyons and you only have 38 miles to go to go through the low country to get to the finish line. So getting to Forest Hill is a big accomplishment mentally because you're like, okay, I'm done the canyons. I'm through the hot part of the day. Now I just have to work through the evening into the morning to get to that finish line. So I mentioned that as a breakdown because when you think about patience for this race, one of the biggest mistakes that many runners make is they go out too fast. And this is natural, right? You're at the starting line, you're geared up, you're excited. There's a big, long climb to start the race. It's about 4 miles of climbing to get from 6,000 feet up to 8,900 feet when you hit that peak over at Olympic Valley. And then there's some downhill section to get you down, mostly downhill to get you to Lions Ridge for the next 6 miles. And then from Lion Ridge to Red Star, it's some up and a little bit of down to Red Star. From Red Star at mile 16 to Duncan Canyon and at mile 24 is a lot of nice running trail, quite a bit of downhill. I know that some of that track is really soft, a lot of pine needles and loose dirt. So you can really start to feel like I can make up some time. And then there's a long climb from Duncan Creek up to Robinson Flat. The mistake that most runners make in this race is they go out too fast, and they go out too fast in the high country. So one, they're moving more quickly than their bodies will allow them to do later in the race. Secondly, a lot of times people, because they're feeling good, they don't hydrate enough, they don't drink enough, they don't take enough salt, they don't eat enough, which is okay for those first 30 miles, but you end up suffering the consequences of that because you did not keep up with caloric intake. Or as the day gets hotter, 5 o'clock in the morning, it's nice and cool up in the mountains. But by 11 o'clock, you're starting to climb up to Robinson Flat and it's starting to feel the heat of the day, and you haven't kept up with hydration, you haven't kept up with calories, you haven't kept up with salt. Even that early in the race, you can start to feel it. And that's when you start to see a lot of runners even walk the downhill from Duncan Creek to Robinson because they went out too fast. And because Patrick's goal was to finish the race in a sub 24-hour time, which is a big goal. That was my goal that I just missed. And the goal for a lot of runners is to finish this race in sub 24. The hardest part about this race is really starting with patience in the high country. It was really interesting to track his progress on the live tracker to see that he was able to get to Robinson at 12:15 p.m. And the math on that is basically, you start at 5 a.m. If the kind of the general rule is that if you want to finish in under 24 hours, you want to get to Robinson Flat by about noon, so 7 hours to Robinson. And then get from Robinson Flat at mile 30 to Forest Hill, mile 63, in another 7 hours. So you should be pulling into Forest Hill around 7 p.m. So it's 7 to Robinson, 7 hours, 7 hours to Forest Hill, which is 14 hours total, so that you're at Forest Hill at 7 p.m. So 7 to 7, 7 plus 7, and get to Forest Hill at 7. So it's just like an easy way to think about how do you get to that 24-hour number or the sub 24-hour number. So that leaves you a full 10 hours to go the last 38 miles which is roughly a 15-minute mile pace, right? And again, it's usually cooler. The track's a little bit easier. You don't have any huge climbs, definitely some climbing, but not the big stuff. So that's kind of the mantra. And so it was really great to see Patrick be patient out there, because when you look at his place in the race relative to the 380 runners, he certainly wasn't front of the pack. And he pulled into Robinson around 12:15. So he's really kind of like right on track. The rule, the kind of the joke in the race is the person who wins the race isn't the person that goes the fastest, it's the person who slows down the least. So really kind of maintaining that pace and being patient is something I saw him do based on what we assumed to be his fitness level and his ability. Finally, when he did get to Forest Hill at mile 63, that's where we started to see that he was off track a little bit. So while he left Robinson at 12:15, he got to Forest Hill a little bit past 8 o'clock. So now he's about an hour behind the schedule of a 24-hour race. And oddly, sort of ironically, that's about the time that I was getting into Robinson Flat myself, or into Forest Hill myself, when I did the race in my sub 24 effort, where I left Forest Hill, I think at like 7:58 p.m. So I was about an hour behind schedule as well. But what was really great to see is his patience coming into Forest Hill. So it could have been a situation where he could have seemed panicked, or he could have seemed rushed, or he could have been looking at his watch and saying like, look, I don't have time. I got to keep moving. Let's just go. Let's get out of Forest Hill because I need to make up some time. And what I really observed from him was his ability to be patient, where he came into the aid station. Lisa had set up a crew chief for him, a guy named Jim, who was his crew along the way. So Jim met him at Robinson Flat at mile 30, met him again at mile 55 at a place called Michigan Bluff, drove over to Forest Hill at mile 63. And at each one of those big aid stations, Jim had a chair, had food, had Patrick's package of different nutrition and things that he might eat. And it was really great to see Patrick come into that aid station past 8 o'clock and just sit down for a couple minutes and say to himself, like, look, I'm probably not going to finish in 24 hours. He already knew that. And he wasn't panicked about it. In fact, at Michigan Bluff back at mile 55, Jim had said that he came into Michigan Bluff around 6:15, but stayed there for about 30 minutes because he was having issues with his quads and starting to develop a blister on his foot. So Jim had to work with him, rolling out his quads, had to replace the bandages on his feet, clean off his feet, clean off the blister, all of those things. And so it really could be, easy for him to lose sight of the bigger goal, which is like finish the race, and throw away that big goal in being too hasty coming into Forest Hill. But instead, he looked at where he was and said, look, I'm going to sit, I'm going to eat, I'm going to rest, I'm going to recover so that I can have a strong 38 miles to the finish. So really just observe that patience. And I think the good lesson here for all of us is like, yeah, we want to have those big goals. One, even try to do a race like the Western States. And in your case, maybe it's grow your company to $1 million or $3 million or $10 million in the next 18 or 24 months. It's also important to adjust and look and say, well, look, the bigger goal here is more important than the short-term goal. So in Patrick's case, the bigger goal was to finish the race and not get too obsessed with the 24-hour goal, and knowing that, hey, maybe there's a way for me to make up that time. Let me just be patient here at Forest Hill so that perhaps I can give myself a chance later on to make up some time. So that's certainly number one, is just patience. Number two, persistence. So this is really what the race is all about. And watching Patrick coming out of Forest Hill with Kelly. So now Kelly's linking up with him. Kelly's going to run with him, or ran with him from Forest Hill down to the river. So a stretch of 63 down to mile 78. So a stretch of about 15 miles or so. And so now we see them leave. And I figured, it's 15 miles. So you're figuring at best 3.5 hours, but probably closer to 4, maybe even 4.5 hours to get from Forest Hill down to the river. I know when I did my race, it took me about four hours total to get from Forest Hill, and he and I were running about the same pace. So I kind of had a sense that, okay, he left Forest Hill. It was 8:15. So best case scenario, he's probably going to be down there at 11:30, if he's really, really doing well. But it also could be past midnight when I'm going to be meeting him down at the river to do that pacing. So for me, I left Forest Hill, got back down, drove back down to where the shuttle was going to take me down to the river to meet him. So tried to take a nap, couldn't sleep, but geared up, took the shuttle down and started waiting, just kind of sat and wait. I was down there around 10 o'clock and just laying there on the ground waiting for him to show up at this aid station. So what was really cool was seeing Patrick come rolling in around 11:45. So he ran that next stretch in 3.5 hours, which is really pretty good pace. And so I saw Kelly as he came in and I yelled out to him and we started talking and he said, "Man, this guy was moving on the downhills." He said, I would run the downhills and then we would hike the uphills. And there were some points on the downhills where I felt him right on my tail, where I had to actually pick up my pace as a pacer because I could feel that he was right behind me. And so, this idea of persistence where Patrick was clearly had enough gas in the tank to not give up. And in fact, by running that section in 3.5 hours, it maybe gave him a chance to still finish in that sub 24. And so, keeping that steady pace, that persistence of continuing to move. So even though he was a little behind schedule at Forest Hill, the fact that he slowed down enough, could have been purposeful. Don't know for sure. It was hard to have a long conversation with him. While he spoke English, it wasn't, I should say his English is way better than my Chinese, but hard to know exactly what was going on in his mind just because communication was a little bit tough. But it seemed like I was like, maybe he knows what he's doing here. He knows himself. He's run some big races before, even though he left Forest Hill much later than he should have. The fact that he left some gas in the tank and made up some time on that section along what we call Cal Street in those 15 miles. Now he's pulling into the river at Chuck at 11:45. We left, so then I picked him up. We had to first cross the river. So what that meant, there's a big rope across the river with some people on the ropes, and what you have to do is hold on to the rope and then just wade across the river. And I say wade, in some cases the river actually, the water depth gets up to your chest. So you're just basically like crossing this river, climbing over rocks to get from one side to the next. And then you pull yourself up on a rope to get out of the incline on the other side to a place where you can change your shoes and keep motoring on. So we left the river at about 11:58, I think was the time. And I remember sitting there at the aid station with him at Chuck before we left. And I looked at Jim, his crew chief, and I looked at Kelly. I said, "Look, man, I mean, there's still a chance here. It's not a high probability, but we got 5 hours to go. We got 22 miles. Like, if he can keep moving as well as he just moved down that section, I'm feeling fresh as you can feel starting around at midnight after not sleeping all day, but certainly feeling, strong with my training. I know I could easily go at that pace. So if he's able to just run the downhills and keep hiking up the uphills at a 15-minute overall pace, we got a shot here. It's not crazy to think that this is possible." And so we left Chuck, we crossed the river, changed shoes, hiked up to out of the river on the other side. There's about a 2-mile hike up to a place called Green Gate, where there's another aid station at mile 80. So Green Gate is kind of like you're sort of like now officially getting started with the low country, the last 20 miles. And so that next section is really where I saw a lot of persistence with him because I just kind of followed Kelly's prescription. And every time we hit a downhill, I wouldn't even ask him. I would just start jogging and I would hear him pick up his pace. And we would just keep jogging downhill, keep moving downhill. And every once in a while, I might hear him say something like, "Need to stop," or rest, or some other utterance that was coming out because he was just so fatigued. And we would stop and we would walk. We'd stop running and we would just walk downhill. And then whenever I saw the next downhill or there was a little bit of a climb, we'd hike up the uphill. And as soon as I saw the little ridge and we'd come up and over, I would say, "Okay." That's all I would say is, "Okay." And I would start running and he would follow me. A couple of times we'd be walking down the downhills because he was tired. And I'd just say, "Hey, let's try to run a little." And his words to me, "Okay, I try." That was it. "Okay, I try." And boom, down the hill we go. And we go a couple hundred yards and sometimes a quarter mile down a little downhill. and make up some more time, and he would keep moving, and then we'd hit the bottom of the downhill and be an uphill, and we just hike again. So just watching him be persistent with that plan, that got to run the downhills as best we can and keep hiking up the uphills until we get to the finish line. It was a really great sign of persistence from him. So we talked about patience, we talked about persistence. Let's talk about perseverance. So, of course, right, just moving along for 100 miles requires all kinds of perseverance. But a couple of examples of places where he could have complained, he could have whined, he could have, even given up if he really wanted to find an excuse to give up. Now, I had no doubts that was never going to happen with him. I was fully confident he was going to keep moving. But he certainly had some pretty significant foot problems when he pulled into Michigan Bluff back at mile 55. And Jim had said, like, look, he had this, he said it was even more than a blister. It was just kind of this callus that was in bad shape at the bottom of his foot. And he said, I had to take off his shoes, take off his socks, clean it off, rewrap it, put tape over it, and get him, get his shoes and socks back on. I mean, that's painful. I mean, I've been in that situation where you've got big blisters, or you've got something going wrong with your feet, and it hurts. Like every time you take a step, it hurts. It's painful, and it just throbs, and it's this dull ache that can happen. And yet, despite that issue that cropped up at mile 55, which is really just halfway through the race, he kept moving, he kept running, right? A lot of perseverance there. The second were his quadriceps. So going uphill is hard, right? You're climbing uphill, you're hiking uphill. But in a lot of ways, going downhill can be just as difficult, especially if it's a steeper decline. So when you have these descents, you're relying on your quadriceps to break your fall. Because really, when you're running downhill, all you're doing is controlling a fall. You're letting your body fall, and then you're arresting your fall with your foot. When you hit that downhill, it's a lot of pressure and it's a lot of force that is being stopped by your joints, but also by your quadriceps. And this is a place where many runners, where they end up having a bad day in the canyons, isn't necessarily because of the climbing and because of the heat. It's because they blow out their quadriceps going downhill, trying to move too quickly on the downhill, or just simply overstepping, which can happen. You're trying to jump over a rock or a log or something else. You can overstep and really blow out your quadriceps. And while his quads hadn't been blown out, he definitely told me a couple of times, he's like, my quads, my quads. And I would see him stop and rub, or he would take some salt thinking maybe it was cramps or something else. And I would hear him as we were hiking up these uphills. He would just, every once in a while, he would just grunt. I'd hear him breathe. And every once in a while, I just, we hike up some more. And then maybe a minute later, I'd just hear him grunt again. Sometimes on the downhill, I'd hear him, we're hitting the downhill and just hear him grunt. I could feel for him because I knew he was in pain, but he was able to manage and persevere through that pain. And I remember at one point, even as we finally got to an aid station at a place called Quarry Road. So it's called Quarry Road because it's a rock quarry. And that's at miles 90. So we left the river, mile 78, crossed over, went to Green Gate, mile 80. And then there's two 5-mile stretches. So there's a 5-mile stretch that gets you to an aid station called Auburn Lakes Trail, which is mostly a little bit uphill, not big climbing, but mostly uphill. And then from Auburn Lakes Trail down to Quarry Road, it's 5 miles and mostly downhill. But overall, pretty good 10-mile stretch where you can kind of move pretty well. And I remember getting down to Quarry Road at mile 90. And this is where there is a pretty significant climb. So it's about a 1,200 foot climb to get out of Quarry Road up to a place called Pointed Rocks, which is at mile 93.8. It's almost mile 94. So coming out of Quarry Road at mile 90, it's about a mile and a half of kind of up and down. Nothing big descents, no big, climbs, but about a mile and a half up and down. And then it's basically a mile and a half to 2 miles to go just up. And you're just climbing up this hill to get to Pointed Rocks. And I remember at this point now, it's about 4:00 in the morning when we left Quarry Road. So he and I had been going for about 4 hours at this point. We had both known at this point that 24 hours is definitely not going to happen. When we got to Auburn Lakes Trail, mile 85, it was at exactly 2 a.m. So basically it said, look, you've got 3 hours to go 15 miles, which is a 12-minute mile pace. And I just said, look, 24 hours, I just gave him the look, kind of like shaking my head. And he's, to his credit, he just didn't even care, didn't even faze him that the 24 hours. I think he knew, first of all. And second of all, like a lot of runners, he just realized the real goal here is finish the race. Just have a strong race. Like, don't do anything at this point. You're at mile 85. You only got 15 to go. And that's what I kept telling him. We're getting out of Green Gate and getting to Auburn Lakes Trail. We were like 2 miles away from the Auburn Lakes Trail aid station. And I said, 2 miles to aid station, and then only 15 miles. So I was kind of helping him mentally think that he has, fewer miles to go. And then same thing, we left Auburn Lakes Trail, mile 85, and we're getting close to Quarry Road, 1 mile to aid station and only 10 miles to go, And so we got to Quarry Road. And so we leave Quarry Road, got only 10 miles to go. And we get through that little section of up and down, mile and a half. And now we have this 2 mile climb for the most part, a mile and a half to 2 mile climb. And now it's like 4 a.m. And I remember going up this hill, and there's a point where I needed to stop to take a bio break. And so he went a little bit ahead, and now he's ahead of me instead of me ahead of him. And we're just moving up this hill. And I really started to feel it myself because while he had run 90 miles, which in itself is, crazy to think about, it'd been a long day for me too. Like, I've been up since 6 a.m, spent a lot of time setting up this aid station, carrying all this water, all this equipment, all these tents, setting that up, spending the whole day outside in the sun as these runners are coming through, and then getting back up and out, and then getting to start pacing him at midnight without sleeping at all during the day. I wasn't able to get a nap. So, naturally, I'm starting to feel it too. I think it's pretty normal. Probably not to the extent he was feeling it, but my brain started to shut off entirely. And as I was walking up this hill, I could feel myself actually dozing off. And I'd done this before in a previous race at Bryce Canyon, where I was running along and I actually fell asleep while I was running and almost fell over when I was at Bryce Canyon. So I'd felt this sensation before, and I realized that this is happening again. I'm climbing up this hill at 4 a.m, and my brain is just shutting off, and I could feel my head nod. And if you've ever been, I'm sure you have, in one of those meetings on Zoom or somewhere else, and somebody's been talking a while and it's not very interesting, and you just start to nod off right there at your desk. That was happening to me as I was climbing up this hill. And the reason I knew I was falling asleep is because I was having these little mini dreams that you probably have experienced. You just nod off for a second, but in your brain, something happens and you find yourself in a different place. And I remember climbing up this hill and nodding off. And I think I had some kind of weird dream about a French bakery in that micro moment of sleeping. And so here I am. I'm falling asleep trying to go up this hill, and I hadn't even gone the distance that he had gone. But yet here's a guy ahead of me, and he's just motoring along, and he's actually starting to drop me. He started off just, a good few yards ahead. Then he was 10 yards ahead. And at one point, he was like 20 or 30 yards ahead. And I'm looking up this hill, and this guy is pulling away from me. So to talk about perseverance, like, it was really motivational for me to say, like, man, this guy is just persevering. Like, he's shown the patience to keep going. He's shown persistence. He now is showing perseverance. The way I solved my problems when we finally did get to Point at Rocks, they handed me a cup of coffee that was too hot to drink. So I took the coffee and then poured a half a can of Coca-Cola into the coffee to cool it down. And then I just slammed the whole thing, which woke me up for sure and got me going. So that was a good wake-up juice at 4:30 in the morning when we left Point at Rocks. So we left Point at Rocks, mostly from Point at Rocks down to a place called No Hands Bridge, about 3 miles downhill, nice, easy part of the course. And then you're at No Hands, about 3 miles to go. It's just walking. There is one little last climb to get up to a place called Roby Point, which is a long, persistent climb. But by then, we're only 2 miles to go. We get to the neighborhood at the top of Roby Point, and then it's about a mile through these neighborhoods where you end up at Placer High School, where he pulls in, runs around the track one time, hits the finish line. So he finished in 25 hours, 34 minutes. So off of his ultimate goal time of 24 hours, but still like an excellent, excellent time, an excellent race for him to go, leave Forest Hill at 8:00, 8:15, and finish at 25:30. If we think about that time schedule, had he left Forest Hill at 7 instead of 8:15, he would have been right close to that 24-hour time spot, right? So he ended up finishing about an hour and a half longer than 24 hours, right? So at 25:30. If, he was able to have left Forest Hill at 7, given the time that he spent getting through the low country, he would have finished at 24:15. So that last section, he actually ran it at a pretty good pace, a pace that would have been close to what he would have needed to run had he gotten to Forest Hill by 7. So really excellent when you break it down and think about it that way, that while he missed that goal time by an hour and a half, that last section, he was super strong. And when we finished, I even said to Kelly and Lisa when I met them and Jim at the end of the finish line, I'm like, this guy was just a beast. He just kept going. He would not give up and kept running the downhills, kept jogging whenever he could, wouldn't stop, didn't stop, kept hiking the uphills, never gave himself a reason to stop, never give himself a reason or an excuse to quit. And that was really great to see that persistence, inspirational to me, to know what I'm going to be going through in less than 2 weeks' time in my own race, which is going to be easier than what he went through because my race is shorter with a lot less climbing. But for me, great experience for me to watch him go through that, and a great reminder around the importance of patience, persistence, and perseverance. All right, so just to summarize what we just talked about, I've got 5 strategies that I think will help you be patient, persistent, show perseverance, things that will help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself to go farther. Things that I learned and relearned and was reminded of watching Patrick in his race and going through that last section with him. Before I get into those strategies, I do want to ask you, if you're not following the show already, maybe you found this on LinkedIn or you found this on YouTube or you had this forwarded to you from a friend, please do follow the show so that you get updates on not just this series, but all of the past episodes that we've done, as well as the new stuff that's going to be coming up later this year. We've got a whole new series planned. I'm excited about, can't wait to share with you, starting in just about a month or 2 time. So into the fall of this year of 2024, I've got a whole new series planned. So make sure you follow the show so you can catch those episodes when they come out. Please do like and leave a comment. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or SoundCloud or anywhere else, please do leave us a review. It helps those search and those podcast players to share and promote our show to other people just like you. And it tells us how we're doing and what you like and what we can do to make it even better. And then finally, please do tell a friend. For this episode, right now, you can click that button on your podcast player to share podcasts, send a text, send an email, just say, hey, listen to this episode. Think you really like it. Been listening to this guy, Scott, on his show. Viral is still the best way to get the word out about this podcast. And it would really be appreciated if you could share this with a friend or 10. Okay. So 5 strategies that I learned or relearned or reminded of watching Patrick go through his Western States 100. So number 1 strategy is attitude. The first thing is like no whining, no complaining, period. Yeah. Okay, great. Your quads are shot. Yeah, great. Acknowledge it, accept it, and then take action. This is something we've talked about in previous episodes. Acknowledge it, accept it, take action. Okay, my quads are shot. This sucks. What am I going to do? Like, I can't get them to recover right now. What do I do to take action? I'll try to roll them out. I'll try to take some salt pills. I'm going to keep running the downhills because that was my plan in the first place. So, you really have to keep that attitude going so that, because complaining and whining is not going to help your situation. It's only going to send you in a negative spiral. So it doesn't mean being Pollyanna and nothing's ever wrong. It's just saying, look, this is the situation that I'm in. What can I do to improve it? What can I do to keep going? What can I do to stay on my course, stay on my path? What can I do to try a new path, a new course, a new way forward, which is all what you need for relentless forward progress, right? So number 1 is attitude. Number 2, answer every challenge. Answer every challenge. So look, if you're feeling hot out there, just go a little bit slower. Feeling cramps? Okay, take some salt. Try to roll out your quads. Moving uphill, it's a hike. Okay, just keep moving, right? So every time you hit that challenge, you have to answer that challenge. You can't let that challenge, that obstacle, that impediment, that obstruction be the thing that's going to stop you. You've got to figure a way to overcome it, go around it, go through it, find a new way, divert, be like water if you need to. But in order to, have that mantra of relentless forward progress, you're going to have to answer every challenge. The third also starts with an A. So these are 5 A's on my 5 strategies. Number 1 is attitude. Number 2 is answer every challenge. Number 3 is adjust your goals. Adjust your goals. Yeah, have those big goals. In Patrick's case, his main race plan was Like, what does a 23-hour time look like so that he could give himself a 1 hour buffer to finish in sub 24? But then once the sub 24 wasn't available to him, then it was just a matter of adjusting that goal to just at least continue to run the downhills and hike the uphills. Don't go into what we call the death march where you're just hiking it in. Like, there's still a reason to keep moving. There's still a reason to do as best as you can with the situation that you're in. So, hike up, run down. For the fact that I said, okay, let's run a little bit. He says, I try. Great, let's keep going. So for me in my race, when I knew I was going to be a sub 24 time, I was like, okay, can I get in sub 24:30? And then I realized I was going to do sub 24:30. So I was like, can I get in sub 24:40? And, it's a little micro adjustment in order to keep yourself moving and just adjusting those goals, which is going to help you with relentless forward progress. Number 4, adhere to the process. Adhere to the process. What does that mean? Well, it means like, look, I have a race plan. I'm going to stick to it. When I get to this aid station, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to eat. I'm going to take calories. As I'm out there on the trail, one of the things I kept telling him is I was up ahead of him. I would hold out my water bottle and shake it and say, drink, drink, make sure you drink. And I would say that a couple times, and he would say, yeah, I'm drinking, I'm drinking. And just making sure he was keeping hydrated, making sure he was getting calories from the drink that he was taking, making sure he's getting enough salt along the way. So when you get to that aid station, adhere to the process. Yes, take a break and get up and keep moving, right? You have to adhere to that process because once you start to deviate from the process, that's what's going to slow you down more than your fatigue. You're starting to look like, yes, you need to adjust your goals, but you also have to stick to the process that is necessary to get you to the finish line, right? And the fifth strategy here is ask for help. So think about the help that Patrick was able to get just by simply asking, and maybe even more importantly, not just asking for help, but being willing to receive the help, being willing to receive the help. And so in his case, he was able to have help from Lisa, who organized the Pacers with Kelly and me. She organized Jim as the crew chief. Jim is in like an 8 or 9 time Ironman. Kelly has run, as many races as I've done. Kelly's probably done 3 times the number of races that I have. He's just a grizzled veteran when it comes to these kinds of races. He's done Western States 4 times. That race in itself, he's done 4 times. I've only done 4 100-mile races in my running career. So just goes to show that, look, if you put yourself in a position, ask and receive help, there are going to be people that want to help you. They want to be there for you. I wanted to help him. I wanted to have that experience with him. I told myself I wanted to pay somebody. But even before Kelly had pinged me about hooking up with Patrick and being part of this team, I told myself I want to go out and pay somebody at Western States, even if it's somebody I don't know. Let's just go to an aid station, sign up, say, hey, do you need some help with the stretch? Because I wanted to help someone achieve the things that I was able to achieve. And so there's people like that out there. And if you ask for help and be willing to receive the help, you will get the help that you need to help you do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. So those are my 5 strategies. Number 1, attitude. Number 2, answer every challenge. Number 3, adjust your goals. Number 4, adhere to the process. And number 5, ask and be willing to receive help. So do those things that will help you with keeping going forward, relentless forward progress, and of course, will help you to do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. Go farther.